Hello and welcome to Biblical Worldview. I think that's the name I have settled on for this channel. I like Bible Thinker, but that is taken by a fantastic Christian. His name is Mike Winger, and he is really good at explaining the Bible, answering biblical questions, and looking at things through a biblical lens. But my idea is to have a biblical worldview, to look at the world, look at culture, look at our struggles, look at things that are important in our culture through the lens of the Bible. If God's word is the truth, then that is the lens through which we should be looking at the world and not cultural movements. Last time I recorded a video on critical race theory, whether critical race theory is Marxist. The idea is critical race theory just teaching honest history? Is it just an obscure legal theory taught about in law school? Or is it a harmful Marxist ideology that is insidiously and wickedly worming its way into all of our institutions? And I think hopefully I demonstrated that critical race theory is race Marxism. Race Marxism is a book written by James Lindsay where he very painstakingly goes through all of the history. I did a brief overview, but critical race theory can very clearly be shown to descend from Marxism and to be a Marxist theory applied to race. Karl Marx taught a class conflict theory. There was the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, the haves and the have-nots. The 1%, I can't really do a Bernie Sanders impression, but the 1% who have all the money versus the rest of us, the 99%. There's always the oppressors and the oppressed, the evil oppressors gaining their dominance on the backs of the oppressed. Karl Marx could not have an economic revolution the way that he envisioned because in all Western countries, a middle class developed. Capitalism worked. And so after Karl Marx came Antonio Gramsci. He came up with the idea of cultural hegemony, which meant that we need to take over and dominate all the means of cultural production, all of the institutions. Rudi Dutschke, he made famous the idea, this idea of the long march through the institutions, that we need to take over the means of cultural production in education, in schools, in media, in the church, in all areas of our society. And from that later came the Frankfurt School. In the Frankfurt School, Max Horkheimer, Theodore Adorno, the biggest one was Herbert Marcuse, and I shared two ideas from Herbert Marcuse. And we're going to I want to go over those two at the end, the idea of false consciousness and repressive tolerance, because they are just absolutely crucial to understand what is happening today in our culture and why. And this all goes back to Marxism. They were all Marxists. From the Frankfurt School came critical theory, and critical theory basically looks at all of history, all of our disciplines through the lens of oppressed and oppressor. And you can clearly see that goes all the way back. That's Marxist. It's a Marxist theory. It's a conflict theory, oppressor and oppressed. It just takes the economic and class theory of Marxism and applies it to all sorts of identity categories such as race, gender, sex, sexual orientation, transgender, queer theory. All of these things are Marxist theories applied to identity categories. And so critical race theory is race Marxism. Anybody telling you differently either does not know what they're talking about, either doesn't understand critical theory, doesn't understand Marxism, or they're part of the elite in this movement that are lying to you. Now, the term critical race theory, when we're looking at it applied to education and educational institutions, it's tricky because there are lots of words or phrases that mean almost the same thing. So the terms critical race theory, CRT, can mean the same as woke racism. That's John McWhorter's term. Critical social justice, wokeness. All of this falls basically under this umbrella of critical race theory. They all really support the same ideologies. Anti-racism, that's another one. And all of this movement, it has to be called something. And so critical race theory is a good term, or critical social justice, to explain all of these things. But if you hear wokeness, if you hear social justice, that term should be a good thing, but it's been perverted by this movement. Or critical race theory, I mean, it all is referring to the same basic set of ideologies. They all come from critical theories, and specifically when it relates to race, critical race theory. Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the term critical race theory, called it a critical theory of race. It's critical theory Marxism applied to race. So should Christians be for this? Should Christians be concerned about this? Yes. Critical race theory is distinctly anti-Christian. Christians are not to show partiality. CRT is anti-Christian because it replaces, for many reasons, but one is it replaces the sinfulness of all humanity. The Bible says, Romans 3:23, that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. All, every human being is in the same boat. All of us are sinners. There is no one righteous. Romans 3:10, there is no one righteous, not one. All of human beings, all of humanity is in the same boat. We are all sinners. We are separated from God by our sin. There is not one group who is somehow more sinful by virtue of their skin color than another group. The idea of critical race theory, or all critical theories, is they separate everyone by their identity group into oppressors versus oppressed. White people are evil. Whiteness is the original sin. It replaces actual sin with this idea of whiteness. While it ignores the sins of marginalized identity groups. It makes one group of people just by color, their skin color, by their sexual minority status, by their gender minority status, being a woman, not minority technically, but not having power. And it looks at, all it looks at is power differentials. This group has power, this group does not. There's no nuance, there's no gray area that looks at it. There's no biblical lens at all. The Bible says that God created humanity in His image. Not white people, not black people, all human beings. We are one race. We will never get past this if we look at race through the lens of critical race theory, because it makes race the most important thing about us. It separates everybody, takes away our individuality, and it assumes everything about you. The most important thing about you is the color of your skin. That is wrong. That is not biblical. That is not Christian. There is no merging this or accepting this or using it as a tool. What you need, the tool you need to conquer racism, is right there, the Bible. Also, there are two really good books I would recommend on this. Well, three. One is by Vitti. It's called Fault Lines. Another is right there, Why Social Justice is Not Biblical Justice. And that one right there, that's actually my favorite, by Thaddeus Williams. That's a DVD, but you can read the book. The book's really, really good. Confronting Injustice Without Compromising Truth. Because God does care about injustice. I said that on the social justice end, and I took a lot from that book when I did that video. Now, I want to look at the idea that critical race theory is not being taught in schools. Because if it is, we got a major problem. And there's been people standing up at board meetings. You could look at YouTube fighting this idea that their children are being taught critical race theory. And the response from the people on the boards of education, the people in the media, is like, what are you talking about? CRT being taught in schools? Critical race theory is something taught in law school. It's a legal theory. Derek Bell, Faces at the Bottom of the Well, The Permanence of Racism, Kimberly Crenshaw, all of these, Matsuda, all of these authors, people in law school read these books. We're not giving these books to kids in elementary school. Well, I agree with that. Critical race theory is not being taught in schools, it's being practiced in schools. You have to separate an academic theory from the practice of that theory. I shared last time, and I'm going to share again, quotes from Richard Delgado and Jean Stefancic in their book, Critical Race Theory and Introduction, where they say Critical race theory is an activist theory. All critical theories are activist. I shared in the last video quotes from Max Horkheimer. It's not just some obscure theory where you're looking at theoretical physics and you're learning some theory that just informs your brain. All critical theories are activists. Their goal is revolution, their goal is change, and I will demonstrate that shortly. So you have to separate an academic theory that may be taught in law schools. It started in law schools, it branched out, I'll prove that in a minute too, from the practice of that theory. Academic theory from praxis. Praxis is the outward working of maybe an academic theory. And there are laws, a lot of conservative states are passing laws that are banning critical race theory, and people are going back against these things and saying, you're banning the teaching of Afro-American history, you're whitewashing history, you're making America only look like it's a good country and has only done good things. But that's not true. Laws banning critical race theory are not banning the teaching of African American history. They're not banning the teaching of systemic racism where it actually exists. That's another video. And they're not banning the teaching of historical racism in the United States. Slavery happened. It was an evil, wicked institution. But it is one that we overcame. Jim Crow laws were a wicked, evil, systemic, racist institution. There have been a lot of examples of systemic racism in our history, and those ought to be examined. Real history ought to be taught. But what these laws generally ban, they ban teaching racism as the fundamental organizing principle of our society. Remember, that's the definition James Lindsay gave us of critical race theory. The idea that racism created by white people for their own benefit is the fundamental organizing principle of our society. Examples of this that are going on in school is shaming white children for being white oppressors, the idea of white privilege. Is there white privilege? Maybe there is, but there are all sorts of privilege. Living in America is a privilege. Having two parents is a privilege. Having some kind of wealth, being able to send my kids to good schools. There are so many, wealth is a privilege. There's so many privileges that we enjoy in America that you can't just separate them by identity groups, but you have to if you ascribe to critical theories. Okay. So there's, in schools, children are being shamed. They come home from school crying because they hate their whiteness and being part of this system of whiteness. Teaching black children that they are oppressed and victims just by the virtue of their skin color. And, you know, this false one-dimensional interpretation of history, looking at history only through the lens of critical race theory, is wrong. There is real history. There are good things and there are bad things in American history. There are things that we inherited from Great Britain and the Western world in general, and things that existed far too long in America and should have ended earlier. We need to teach history honestly, but we can't teach it one-dimensionally as if only one group was evil and complicit and another group is somehow blameless. Critical race theory does not aim to teach honest history about America's historical crimes of slavery and racism. It does not. We were already teaching that, and we should teach that. But the goal of critical race theory is to reinterpret all history through the lens of critical theory, of critical race theory, of Marxism. It looks at everything through a Marxist lens. Through oppressors and oppressed, you are either one or the other. There is no nuance. And so examples of this are the 1619 Project by Nikole Hannah-Jones. Nikole Hannah-Jones made the claim, the chief claim in the 1619 Project, there's a lot more to it. Some of it is actually, in my opinion, decent, looking at historical facts and things through a racial lens. But her fundamental claim was basically that 1776 shouldn't be our nation's founding, it should be 1619, because the reason we fought the Revolutionary War, the reason the Americans wanted this revolution was to protect the institution of slavery. The New York Times had to go back, and real historians have debunked this claim before she made this claim, before the 1619 Project came out. She was warned not to make this claim because it is false, it is a lie. That is not why we fought the revolution. So they amended it to say some, but that's the basic, the crux, the fundamental argument of the 1619 Project is the Revolutionary War was fought to protect racism. Now, that's interest convergence. Remember, that was one of Derek Bell, one of the fundamental tenets and beliefs of critical race theory, that white people only do good things when it is for their own interests. And so the Revolutionary War, even the Civil War, even Kansas, Brown versus the Board of Education that ended legal segregation in the United States, all of these things were done for the benefit of white people. They weren't done because they were actually right, because white people are evil and have wrong intentions. Another example is Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. Many college students are required to read this, including students in schools of education. So was Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States an accurate telling of history? Was the 1619 Project just teaching honest history? No. In a 1998 interview in Flagpole magazine, Howard Zinn said he had set quiet revolution as his goal for writing A People's History. He said not a revolution in the classical sense of a seizure of power, of a coup d'etat, of a violent revolution, but rather from people beginning to take power from within the institutions. Remember Antonio Gramsci? Cultural hegemony, a dominating and slowly taking over the culture. Remember Rudy Dutschke's quote, "A long march through the institutions"? So Zinn goes on to say, in the workplace, the workers should take power to control the conditions of their lives. Workers of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains. Who said that? Karl Marx. The lens through which Howard Zinn views history is not impartial. He's not looking to tell events as they happened. In the same interview with Flagpole magazine, he shared his philosophy as a historian. He says, I have always felt that a scholar or a writer has to take sides for the victims. Who decides who the victims are? Look, you're either an oppressor or an oppressed. There's no gray area where all humanity is somehow sinful and complicit in sin. And different people, there were good people that were white that fought against evil things. There were good people that were wealthy that fought against some of these evil things. That's what the American Revolution was about. It was a lot of wealthy people in America who fought that, who risked everything to revolt against the unjust oppression of Great Britain. History has nuance. History is complicated. There were good people that did evil things. There were evil people who did some good things. He says, so from the very beginning, I have always objected to neutrality and objectivity. The most important task of a historian is to use the material of the past in order to defend the victims, those who have not been in power. This is complete Marxism. So when we look at the idea that is critical race theory taught in schools, yes, college students are indoctrinated. They are brainwashed into looking at everything through this lens of critical theory. Not just critical race theory, but critical gender theory, queer theory, all of these fat studies, disability studies, they are being brainwashed. And then they get jobs, they work in the workplace, they work in schools, they become teachers, and they pass this ideology right on to the kids. It's evil, but it's working. In Detroit Public Schools, they said, our curriculum is deeply using critical race theory, especially in social studies, but you'll find it in English language arts and the other disciplines. Detroit Public Schools Superintendent Nikolai Vitti said at a November 9th Board of Education meeting, we were very intentional about creating a curriculum, infusing materials, and embedding critical race theory within our curriculum. It is not just like in language arts, it's not just in social studies, it's insidiously in math curricula, in word problems, all of it. It's permeated all aspects of education in many areas. In California, it says, a sample course description included in California's model curriculum affirms CRT's centrality for the field of ethnic studies. Students will be introduced to the concept critical race theory as they highlight and discuss an assigned reading in small groups. reads the description of an actual course taught at San Juan High School in Citrus Heights. One of the main focuses of ethnic studies is translating historical lessons and critical race theory into direct action for social justice. It's not just teaching history, but it's creating social justice warriors out of unsuspecting students by teaching them lies. At the for the National Education Association, one of the largest unions, the AFT and the NEA are the two big teacher unions in our country. Extremely powerful. At the NEA's Representative Assembly held virtually, well, it wasn't last week, but when I pulled this quote, union delegates passed several measures that explicitly support the use of critical race theory in curriculum and allocated tens of thousands of dollars to these efforts. Now, all of the NEA's promotion on CRT has since been scrubbed, since parents have been standing up against this, so they can perpetuate the lie that there is no CRT going on in our schools. One such measure, introduced by the NEA's board of directors, said the nation's largest teachers union will support and lead campaigns that, quote, result in increasing the implementation of culturally responsive education, critical race theory, and ethnic studies curriculum in pre-K through 12 and higher education. Both of these quotes are from edweek.org. Going back to critical race theory and introduction, I think that was written in 2001, and it's a primer on critical race theory by critical race theorist, co-founder Richard Delgado and his wife Jean Stefancic. He writes, although CRT began as a movement in the law, it has rapidly spread beyond that discipline. What happened to it just being a theory taught in law schools? It's not. Because their theories are activist, their goals are change. Their goal ultimately is revolution. Today, many in the field of education consider themselves critical race theorists who use CRT's ideas to understand issues of school discipline and hierarchy, tracking controversies over curriculum and history, and IQ and achievement testing. They go on to say, seeing critical race theory take off in education has been a source of great satisfaction. This is in an interview, not in their book, Critical Race Theory and Introduction. But in an interview, Richard Delgado says, seeing critical race theory take off in education, I thought it wasn't in education. I thought it wasn't in schools. Is a great source of satisfaction for the two of us. Critical race theory is in some ways livelier in education right now than it is in law, where it is a mature movement that is settled down by comparison. It is settled down in law. It is taking off in education. I shared in my last video how Paulo Freire, a Brazilian Marxist, wrote a book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. It does not teach teachers how to teach, how to manage classrooms, how to be effective teachers. It teaches them to look at education through a Marxist lens. And almost all of them in education schools have to read this book. They are being brainwashed to view education through a lens of Marxism. And it is successful. And so the question we have to ask ourselves, since it is an absolute proven fact that CRT, maybe it's not being taught in schools, it's being practiced in schools. It's being applied in schools. So why are they lying and saying CRT isn't being taught or practiced in schools, or that it's just teaching honest history? Of course, if it's those who say it's just teaching honest history are admitting that it is being taught in schools, then. I mean, pick. It's not being taught in schools, or it is. Or that it's just a legal theory taught in graduate level law school. That is a lie. That's where it's being taught, but it's being applied to our children in K through 12 education all over the place. And not just critical race theory, queer theory, gender theory. Our kids' minds are being destroyed. So that's a fact. Why are they lying? Because they don't want people to know the truth. What happens when parents know that their children are being divided along racial lines and being taught that they're oppressed victims depending on the color of their skin, or that they're evil, part of an evil, oppressive white supremacy that's out there? Parents don't want this. Parents know this is wrong. And when they know the truth, they fight it. They fight against it.
When you talk about critical race theory, which is pretty much going to be teaching kids how to hate each other, how to dislike each other, that's pretty much what it's going to pretty much, I don't care what you say, it's pretty much what it's going to all come down to. You're going to deliberately teach kids, this white kid right here got it better than you because he white? You're going to purposely tell a white kid, oh, the black people are all down and suppressed. How do I have 2 medical degrees if I'm sitting here oppressed? How did I get, first of all, time up, because I only got 5 minutes now, 5 minutes. 2 medical degrees. No mom, no dad in the house. Worked my way through college. Sat there and hustled my butt off to get through college. You gonna tell me somebody that looked like all y'all white folks kept me from doing that? Are you serious? What's sickening about this whole thing is what y'all doing right now is already something I do in my community right now to speak out against stuff, because black folks are getting told by other black folks, oh, you know you ain't gonna be able to do nothing out there in the world because them white folks ain't gonna let you get no, or you know you're not gonna be able to do it because you know the white man gonna keep you down. Well, how did I get where I am right now if some white man kept me down? How am I now directing over folks that look just like you guys in this room right now? How? What kept me down? What oppressed me? I work for myself from off the streets to where I am right now. You gonna sit here and tell me this lie of critical race theory?
Who are good people that do not want their children being taught this evil, wicked, divisive garbage. So let's go back and talk about the 2 key ideas from Herbert Marcuse, who's the Frankfurt School. He was the Marxist who gave us, I shared a lot of quotes last time from Repressive Tolerance, and one from Antonio Gramsci. Repressive tolerance. Remember, I shared a lot on it last time, but Herbert Marcuse wrote an essay, Repressive Tolerance, and the basic idea was that you cannot be tolerant of the structures and systems that already exist, that have the power. You cannot be tolerant of the government. You can't be tolerant of equal time for both sides and having a rational discussion and deciding what is true, because all of the mechanisms of that discussion are perpetuating the power structures that already exist. He said it's an emergency. We need a revolution by any means necessary. We need to cancel. We need to be completely intolerant, even if it's violently intolerant, of anything on the right, and completely accepting, no matter what it is, of anything on the left. And so that has given us cancel culture, whereas anybody on the right or anybody on the left who says anything that is out of step with this Marxist, crazy Marxism that's going on, or even asking questions or saying, oh, let's settle down, let's not rush into transitioning our kids into another gender and giving them puberty blockers when they're 2, 3, 10 years old, 16 years old. Let's not have them at young ages chop off their boobs, make a decision that renders them infertile for the rest of their life. Let's just settle down. Let's slow down. You're canceled for saying those things. You're canceled for believing something that 5 years ago everybody would accept and believe, or 99% of people outside of college professors. Cancel culture is an aspect of repressive tolerance. You could say the craziest things on the left and get away with it. People supporting Marxism. Marxism is such a harmful, destructive ideology, the most evil ideology of the 20th century that has resulted in the death, gulags, canceling of freedom, of anti-democratic ideals. Over 100 million people have died. It's resulted in the misery for hundreds of millions more in China, Cambodia. Great, good, wealthy countries like Rhodesia toss capitalism aside, become communist, and everybody starves. It is such a destructive ideology, and somehow we're tolerant of that ideology. People are seeing Che Guevara. People wear shirts. They say, oh, well, he was a freedom fighter. They raise that fist of resistance, and they support wicked and evil and intolerant ideologies in the name of tolerance. That's repressive tolerance. Look at social media companies. Canceling accounts, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, saying there are things that you can't say on the right, but you can say almost anything on the left. Anything, like whether it's on just looking at coronavirus, honestly, whether or not we should wear masks, whether Anthony Fauci's strategy is the best strategy. All of this stuff gets downgraded, gets accounts canceled, gets YouTube channels canceled. I don't know. Now you can't call these people promoting transgender theory and sexualizing children. You can't say, okay, groomer, that word now gets videos canceled and your account's canceled. I don't know how this works. We'll see if I get struck or something like that. But you can say anything on the left. If you look at the news media cancels anything. There was this whole huge Russia investigation with Donald Trump where there was this idea of Russian collusion. There was no evidence from it. It has been proven to be false and based on an absolute lie. But the media teaches it as if it's true. So people actually believe there was collusion between Donald Trump and Russia. But what happens before the election? We find a laptop that demonstrates that Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, and Joe may have been getting payments from the Ukraine. And right away, that story comes out. Immediately, it gets canceled by Twitter and all of the mainstream media outlets and other social media, saying that this bears all the hallmarks of a Russian hoax. Well, as it turns out, it wasn't a Russian hoax. Don't you think if that was something, if Donald Trump's son, Donald Trump Jr., they found this laptop, that all the same groups would be supporting it? They wouldn't be canceling that story. The news media is canceling any story that favors the right and promoting any story that favors the left. That's repressive tolerance. Colleges and universities, they don't want diversity in their schools. They want everybody to think the same. They do not want to promote black voices who share a different narrative than the Marxist narrative that they support. 90-something% of college professors are on the extreme left. 90% of college professors vote Democrat, and they create more of those through their students. That is not diversity. Diversity should be different people who think differently and are able to actually argue and debate ideas, no matter what those ideas are. Antifa, which stands for anti-fascist. They're against fascism, and yet they use fascist tactics. They are anarchists. They are destructive. They foment riots, burning down buildings. They cover their faces with masks so that people can't tell who they are. They should all be thrown into prison. They beat people to death. Andy No, you can look him up, NGO. It's pronounced no, though. Andy No. He was former Antifa and now speaks out against them and their tactics. They've assaulted him many, many times and almost killed him, stomped his head. They're an evil organization, yet they are given cover by the leftist media. Repressive tolerance, that is one of their tactics, and it's one that is just going swell. The other idea is this idea of false consciousness, and false consciousness is basically saying you don't realize that you're oppressed when things are going well in your life, and so they create these oppressed groups. Fat people are oppressed. How are they oppressed? And that's one of these critical theories, fatness studies now. Well, obesity is something that I personally struggle with. Is that somebody else's fault? Am I oppressed? I'm oppressed. That's a choice that I make. I choose to eat food. I am not a slave to my passions. It's a bad choice that I make. I'm not oppressed because of it. If I feel like I'm oppressed because of it, I can change it. Being gay, being black, being a racial minority, being Hispanic. See, the idea is they have to create oppression. They have to manufacture this idea of oppression and victimization in these groups. They give them pathologies. They teach people you have to be afraid of the police. A great example of this, is George Floyd, or all of these names of unarmed black people that were killed by the police. And there's this idea out there that it's open season on black people. I forget who said that. Or black people are afraid to leave their homes because of all of the chances that, they may just be gunned down in the street by a racist cop. But when surveys are given out to people asking, well, each year, how many unarmed black people are actually killed by the police? The further to the left, the more likely their guess is to be something like 10,000 unarmed black people are killed by the police. Then people that consider themselves moderately left, it's more like 1,000. So think about this in your head. You see all these cases of black people being gunned down in horrible ways. And I'm not saying these are not atrocities and these are not tragedies. They are. Every human life being taken is a tragedy. But the question is, think in your head, what is the answer to that? On an average year, how many unarmed black people are killed by the police? Guess what? The answer is somewhat close to 15. 15. And it's actually far less than unarmed white people that are killed by the police. In a given year, something like 27 unarmed white people are killed by the police. And the response is usually, but blacks are only 16% of the population. So they should, there's a disparity there. But you wouldn't expect different populations of people to be killed in an equal measure to the percentage of the overall population to be the same. You would expect people in communities that have more policing and people that have records of more violent crimes and people who have more interactions with police to have a higher percentage chance of being killed by the police. And so statistics are abused because they want to create a pathology in all people of any kind of oppressed minority group to show that they need to have a revolution. False consciousness, the idea that things have gotten better, that things are doing better, we still have some work to do. There is still racism. We need to work on those things. But that idea is not going to produce the revolutionary zeal necessary. And so we need to get rid of false consciousness and replace it with a revolutionary consciousness. The final idea is Antonio Gramsci's idea of cultural hegemony, where they need to take over every institution. The media, social media, which didn't exist then, and the churches. There's a lot of churches that have fallen into this trap of false social justice ideology, not true social justice, because God cares about social justice. I don't want to repeat my whole social justice video again, but a lot of churches, a lot of Christians have fallen for a lie. That's why we need to confront injustice, but without compromising truth. We need to stand for what's true and not try to just be liked by people, not set in ourselves an idol of social approval, but stand for what is actually true. And we have to realize that this insidious ideology has taken over everything. It's infected everything. Our media companies, Blues Clues, things that go out to our children. We have to be very careful because these messages are out there and they're infecting the brains of our kids. And that is by design. It is not accidental. So we have to be aware of this, and we have to have the information and willingness to fight this. And so that is why I recorded this video. Please feel free to ask questions. You are welcome to push back on anything that I've shared. There is far more information out there proving how much CRT has infected our education systems in schools. I think I've given enough evidence of that, but I mean, there's Towards a Critical Race Theory of Education by Gloria Ladson-Billings has written thousands of articles and references to her from education schools, and she's a critical race theory activist. It's in education, that's a fact. But I am always open to being proven wrong, and I want to just believe whatever is true. But I don't believe critical race theory is true. I think it's evil. I think it's destructive. I think it's a really harmful way of viewing things. I think it is destructive to all people, black people even more than others. I think it creates oppression rather than just points out oppression. It's horrible. It's sad. Don't fall for it. All right. Thank you so much for watching. If you've watched all of this, sorry, I know it's a little long, but it's reality. And it's better to believe a hard truth than to just go along as if everything's okay, because everything is not okay, especially if we don't fight this. God bless you. Have a great day.